Tonight on CBC Vancouver News. New fears about new rules.
So I'm not a scofflaw. I don't shirk the law. I'm following all the rules, paying all the taxes.
Ultimately, our goal is to get more housing back into the housing market for people to be able to rent.
Some Airbnb hosts in BC worry updated short-term rental regulations could crater their investments. Plus, deadly crash. A pedestrian is killed after a car hits a Vancouver store. And tentative deal. Teaching support staff at SFU reach an agreement with the university.
Even though the strike is over, the consequences aren't.
But some students want tuition refunds for canceled classes.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. Some Airbnb hosts in BC say they feel stunned by the province's recently announced short-term rental regulations. The legislation is meant to target property owners with multiple units listed on rental platforms. As John Hernandez reports, some fear their investments are about to take a big hit.
I do not think this is the right way to do it, and it's going to have a lot of unintended consequences.
Victoria's Deborah Sheets fears her investment is going to cost her big. Earlier this year, she spent more than $400,000 on a micro suite she lists on Airbnb.
I've put all my savings into my unit. I'm following all the rules, paying all the taxes, buying the business license.
Sheets says it supplements her retirement income, but she fears that revenue stream will dry up. On Monday, the province outlined impending rules to regulate short-term rentals. Hosts will only be allowed to list their primary residence.
Ultimately, our goal is to get more housing back into the housing market for people to be able to rent.
The province says the goal is to target owners who list multiple units, but those who bank on just one feel like they're innocent bystanders.
It's going to decrease the value of our property, and we're not going to be able to find anyone who wants to rent it at a price, a long-term rental that would be able to afford the cost to cover our mortgage.
These are units that were originally designed and intended for young and new households.
This housing policy expert says the short-term rental market has given investors unrealistic expectations.
This is something that I think is really a busted bet on real estate, on residential real estate, and that residential real estate is not commercial property.
And renters have paid the price. Research from McGill University shows short-term rentals in markets like Victoria and Vancouver have brought vacancy rates down by a full %, while increasing rents by about $50 a month.
Which sounds like a small amount, but they ultimately have cumulative effects for renters who are already challenged in this province.
Still, small-scale operators contend they're filling a need.
We charge half the rates that hotels charge, about on average, I would say. There are a lot of people operating short-term rentals without following the laws, and those need to be cracked down on. Maybe they need to restrict the number of short-term rentals, but to treat us all as if we're one uniform entity just isn't the case.
The new rules are expected to roll out in stages next year, starting May 1st. John Hernandez, CBC News, Vancouver.
Two lawsuits involving allegations of child abuse by the same Catholic organization are nearing an end on opposite sides of this country. For a group of survivors in Newfoundland, it's been 24 years in the making. Here in Vancouver, a much different approach is taking shape, one that could put survivors front and center. Ryan Cook has more from St. John's.
It's been 3 years since former students of two Catholic boys' schools in BC started coming forward. With more than 100 former students now involved, it appears their class action lawsuit is coming to a close. A lawyer for the students says negotiations are ongoing for a process to settle the case outside of court.
There will have to be still full disclosure of evidence as to what happened, what the schools knew about the abuse by the Christian Brothers, what measures they took or didn't take to prevent it.
Both Vancouver College and St. Thomas More Collegiate say they want to go to a mediator. They say it's an important step for truth and reconciliation. The schools were staffed in part by 6 men transferred from the Mount Cashel Orphanage between 1975 and 1981. All 6 were later convicted for abusing kids at the notorious St. John's Orphanage. It's alleged they continued to hurt kids in British Columbia. If the Vancouver case is wrapping soon, it'll be in stark contrast to the Mount Cashel civil case, which has been ongoing for 24 years. Survivors expect to start getting paid soon,
but it's been a long wait, and not everyone has made it.
This man, John Doe, 26, told CBC News in 2020 that he hoped to live to see the end of the case. He died a year later. Joe Fiorante says they want to avoid a similar fate.
Those gentlemen there have been through many trials, many bankruptcy claims, and are still seeking civil justice, 50 years later, 60 years later. And that's something that's weighing very heavily on us.
Consider the case of Sean Monroe, a man who died 1 year ago this week. He told his family he was abused at Vancouver College and that he couldn't get over it. He died of complications related to alcoholism.
The Vancouver survivors say they don't want to lose anyone else during this process. The schools say if all goes well, barring any delays, they should be able to reach a settlement by year-end. Ryan Cook, CBC News, St. John's.
Work stoppages at SFU are over for now. Striking teaching assistants and the university have reached a tentative agreement after 3 weeks of job action. But the fight is not over for some students. As Michelle Morton reports, some undergrads want a break for canceled classes.
Even though the strike is over, the consequences aren't.
Adriana Cumming-Teicher is part of a group of undergraduate students who started a petition in solidarity with the TSSU, demanding the university provide a tuition refund for classes canceled due to the work stoppage.
We have not been getting the quality of education that we have paid for.
The SFU Faculty Association let its members know ahead of the strike those who did not want to cross the picket line should avoid holding any classes, warning the university may deduct some salary for work missed. CBC News was at the SFU Burnaby campus on Wednesday, the day before the tentative deal was reached, and heard from students about how the job action has affected them.
It definitely has. I'm an undergrad, so my tutorials and labs are canceled, and I don't have a lot of valuable teaching time, and some of my assignments have been delayed or canceled.
I feel a little bummed out because I'm a first year here, and I don't get to enjoy quality education.
Cumming-Teicher says as of Thursday afternoon, the petition has garnered more than 2,600 signatures.
We need to get those students the education they're paying for, to be able to thrive in the university environment. And frankly, because they're not going to get that, they deserve to be repaid.
A spokesperson for SFU says in a statement, in part, "We recognize that the strike action has disrupted the academic experience for our students this term, and for that we are very sorry." The university also says it will be making other grading and course completion options available to students who have had their learning disrupted. Michelle Morton, CBC News, Vancouver.
A pedestrian has been killed after a car jumped onto the curb in the downtown east side today. Vancouver police say two vehicles collided in the middle of Columbia Street in East Hastings. A person on the sidewalk was struck and killed when one car jumped that curb, then crashed into a nearby corner store.
And the next thing, I heard out of my ear was bang, and I looked and whoa, everyone was like, whoa,
It's still not clear what caused the crash. Police say both drivers did stay at the scene. The next phase of the Massey Tunnel replacement project has begun. This is a rendering of a new 8-lane underwater tube tunnel that the BC government wants to replace the current older tunnel. The province says it will improve travel for people along Highway 99 between Richmond and Delta, long a slow bottleneck for many commuters for decades. The Transportation Ministry says 3 bid teams have been invited to submit proposals for the design of the project. It's expected that the team will be on board this spring. The new tunnel, though, not set to be finished until 2030. A rally in support of Palestinians caught in the brutal fighting in Gaza and Israel is underway at Vancouver City Hall tonight. Some who are gathering are also calling out local leaders. Our Liam Britton is there. We spoke a short time ago. Liam, what's happening there?
Yeah, you can see there's lots of people holding flags, signs, cars honking their horns in support of the Palestinian cause here in this recent fighting, which has turned so deadly. Organizers are a number of groups, including Youth for Palestine, Boycott, Divest, Sanction, and Sami Doon, the Palestinian prisoner support network. Signs highlighting the higher death toll on the Palestinian side, including the deaths of children, who some are calling the forgotten victims. They're demanding an end to the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories and an end to the fighting. They're calling for peace, and they're demanding an end to what they're terming genocide in the Palestinian territories. The mood is calm, obviously very somber for such a serious situation on the world stage. Lots of police and security here, but no incidents at all that I've seen.
And Liam, what other messages are they sharing?
Yeah, so this definitely isn't the first rally or event in support of the Palestinian people since this fighting has picked up in recent weeks. There was a march just last night, even in Vancouver. But some are making this kind of putting a local focus on this event. They're calling out local officials, in particular Mayor Ken Sim, for how they've kind of handled this conflict. They're accusing him of Zionism and, quote, complicity in support of genocide in Palestine. The mayor has issued statements in support of Israel and spoke at a pro-Israel rally in recent weeks, but also has spoke at a mosque where there were messages of support for civilians on both sides of this conflict. We have asked the mayor for comment about this rally in particular today, but we didn't get an immediate response, Dan.
Liam Britton reporting from City Hall. Thank you. To other news now. Every year, people in this province take part in the Great British Columbia Shakeout, and MLAs in Victoria joined in today, pausing their work for a practice quake safety drill. At 10:19, a loudspeaker announcement rang out in the BC legislature to drop, cover, and hold on. Earthquakes Canada says BC is the most seismically active area of the country and the site of thousands of minor earthquakes every year. Here in Vancouver, schools and businesses held drills as well. With a large earthquake being inevitable at some point, a number of provincial agencies have invested in developing technology that will hopefully give us a few extra minutes to take cover. More now from Renee Filipponi.
All right, so this is what it feels like to be in a magnitude 8 earthquake. It is shaking really hard. This is an earthquake simulator called the Quake Cottage, and it's part of the Great Shakeout. It is a global earthquake drill. Millions of people participating today so they can be prepared. The message is when you see or you feel the earth shake, you're supposed to drop, cover, and hold to protect yourself.
We want to build some muscle memory. We want to be able to immediately drop to the ground when we feel the earth shaking, cover our heads, get underneath a sturdy object like a table if you can, wait for 60 seconds after the ground stops shaking, then you feel safe to leave, you can do that.
Now, if you live in British Columbia, the message has always been it's not a matter of if, but when there will be a major earthquake. So there is new technology now that can give people a heads up so they can know before the major shaking begins. They're called earthquake early warning systems. One has been developed by Ocean Networks Canada. They have sensors in the ocean and along the south coast. And what they can do is they can detect what's called the primary wave. It's the initial energy coming from the earthquake, which happens before the big shaking begins. And that could give people 30, 60 seconds more of a warning so they can do what they need to do to stay safe. Now, they have some major infrastructure partners they're working with, companies like TransLink, airports, hospitals, to let them know that a major earthquake is going to happen so they can take action to prevent deaths. Now, later on in the spring, the federal government is also releasing its own warning system, and that is going to go direct to your phone in the event of a major earthquake, just like an Amber Alert. It would give you a heads up so you can do what you need to do to protect yourself. And again, that's drop, cover, and hold. Renee Filipponi, CBC News, Abbotsford, BC.
Good reminders there, Darius Madavi. We were practicing that here in the CBC Vancouver newsroom.
Yes, as everybody should. It really does feel like BC is prone to, other than tornadoes, most prone in the country to pretty much every kind of natural disaster.
And we've dealt with
hurricanes.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
What are we dealing with now?
Fortunately, our atmospheric river has mostly cleared up, not nearly as bad as some of the ones that we've had here in the past, but it was still moderate to strong, and we did see more rainfall than we even expected. So here again, recap Monday, up to 90 millimeters, almost close to 100 for the west coast, especially centered around Tofino. We moved a bit further south by Tuesday, where it was really centered around Ucluelet, and well over 100 millimeters just over that 24-hour period from 5 a.m. Tuesday to 5 a.m. Wednesday. And here's our big new update today from 5 a.m. yesterday to 5 a.m. today. Still very significant amounts of rainfall for the west coast of Vancouver Island, but a lot of it also made its way here on the mainland. So the Sunshine Coast hit pretty hard with very significant rainfall. And so if we look at the actual totals that we got over the length of the atmospheric river, well over what was even forecasted and warned about by Environment Canada, 267 millimeters near Ucluelet, 206 by Tofino, even the sort of eastern coast of the island where we usually don't see as significant rainfall, up to 96 millimeters. And here on the mainland, our highest amount, close to 150 millimeters of rain. Not even Vancouver was spared, with over 100 millimeters for West Vancouver. So very significant rainfall, and fortunately, not much as we look ahead. So I'll bring you that update later this hour.
Sounds good. Thanks, Darius.
Thanks, Dan.
Ottawa now confirms it has pulled dozens of Canadian diplomats and their families out of India. The CBC's Evan Dyer broke the story and explains what more we know.
2 weeks after India demanded Canada pull dozens of diplomats amid ongoing tensions, Ottawa now confirms they're gone.
India has formally conveyed its plan to unilaterally remove diplomatic immunities for all but 21 Canadian diplomats and dependents.
India had set a deadline of last Tuesday. That came and went as Ottawa tried to reason with New Delhi to no avail.
41 Canadian diplomats and their 42 dependents were in danger of having immunity stripped on an arbitrary date, and this would put their personal safety at risk.
This is the latest escalation in the diplomatic standoff, triggered last month by Canada's allegation that Indian agents participated in the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a Canadian citizen, outside a Sikh temple in Surrey, BC in June. Canada has had to cease all services at its consulates in Bengaluru, Chandigarh and Mumbai. Only the High Commission in New Delhi remains operational, with Canadian staff reduced by about 2/3.
India's decision will impact levels of services to citizens in both countries.
But Ottawa says Canada won't hit back.
If we allow the norm of diplomatic immunity to be broken, no diplomats anywhere on the planet would be safe.
I think it's a little bit of legal hair splitting.
This former ambassador, who was himself expelled from Saudi Arabia, says there's more to it.
I don't see Canada retaliating because, as I mentioned, that we have a lot to lose if India cannot service the populations they have here, and then that would create fear amongst Indian students who want to come to Canada that perhaps they're not welcome or that they can't get the services they need.
Just losing Indian international students could cost the Canadian economy billions of dollars a year. So any further escalation could hurt Canada more than India. Evan Dyer, CBC News, Ottawa.
This week marks 5 years since cannabis was legalized in Canada. We wanted to look at what consumption and product was like in 2018 and how it's changed. But first, this is what opening day looked like for the first 2 non-government-owned shops here in Vancouver.
Come on in, let's do this. It's doors open and cash registers running.
I'm excited to buy it today.
At the first 2 legal pot shops in Vancouver. But who made history being the first in the city is still up for debate.
We were able to be the first Vancouver provincially licensed store here in this market.
We've got the first license, so that will never change. We're definitely the first retail cannabis store in Vancouver.
Regardless of who came first, owners of both shops say opening their doors on Saturday was a chance to be part of a historic moment in the city. After a long wait.
So it was definitely a long process. It took about 4 or 5 months going through the provincial and municipal applications.
Now it's a reality.
City Cannabis was one of the first 2 legal cannabis shops to open in Vancouver. Joining us now to reflect on what's changed since then is James Budd, the Director of Supply Chain and Finance for the National Cannabis Distribution. He works with City Cannabis and Caro Cannabis as well. James, 5 years ago, people raising concerns that legalization would lower product quality and boost costs. What did you make of those concerns at the time?
I definitely think that I think if people were optimistic at the time that that wasn't going to happen. I think the reality when we look back on it is really, and that was probably more true than what we were hoping it would be.
Mm-hmm. And how is it? Has it gotten any better since then in your mind?
Yeah, I think we've come a long way. It's been 5 years since that first door opened, and the quality that you see in the stores definitely comes now rivaling what we saw in the illicit market prior to then. I mean, the expansion of the micro craft producers and the quality that we're seeing coming out of growers these days is far and wide, well beyond what we saw 5 years ago.
And why do you think that is?
I think we were a young industry. I think there's a lot of optimism, and I think there was a lot of rush to get the business working. I think with 5 years of experience, I mean, you've seen better growers come to the market. You've seen better experience. You've seen people learn a lot about what's happened over the last 5 years. And that's really seen in the product that we see on the shelves these days.
Now, how has your work sourcing product changed over the years?
That's incredible because we work in both BC and Saskatchewan. So for us, I mean, the ability to not just have to take on the limited number of products that were there at the time, because when we first started 5 years ago, there was a very limited assortment available. You fast forward to today, and there are thousands of products that you can choose from across the nation, and it gives much more breadth and assortment to the product. So it's less robotic than it may have been at the time, and much more art to what we do.
And in terms of consumers, how have users' habits changed since legalization in 2018?
I think the users' habits have evolved as you might expect. I think there's greater expectations from the consumers in terms of what they see coming out of the stores. I do believe that they are looking for new and something more interesting on a more frequent basis than we saw 5 years ago. And again, it's been 5 years. We're still a new industry, and those things are bound to happen. But it's definitely making for a much more interesting experience. That's for sure.
James Budd, the Director of Supply Chain and Finance with the National Cannabis Distribution. Thanks very much for joining us and giving us some perspective.
Thanks, Dan.
Coming up, one BC Mountie is trying to recruit Indigenous officers, and what an Indigenous former Mountie remembers about his long career. You'll want to see this. Hello to everyone watching our commercial-free live stream tonight. Thanks for being here. For several years now, Alberta has been facing droughts that are threatening farmers and their animals. Members of the province's livestock industry recently gathered in Lethbridge for the Alberta Livestock Expo. Ose Irete has more on how they're adapting.
3,500, 3,536.
Water is a necessary element for life and farming.
When an animal has a higher quality water, they're going to drink more. When they drink more, they're going to eat more. When they eat more, they're going to do better, right?
But with consecutive years of drought conditions across Alberta, it can be hard to come by.
Water quality is important, but more important than water quality is water availability. You're better to have some shitty water than no water, right?
Livestock farming is water intensive. Experts say one dairy cow can drink up to 160 liters of water on a hot summer day.
And that's why we have to really look at our methodologies of treating water, maintaining good water levels, high quality water, and of reusing water again too, wherever we can. Because water is becoming a scarce commodity.
Farmers are finding innovative ways to conserve their water.
In some cases, they're actually dewatering manure, taking the water out of manure, filtering it, treating it, and putting it back into the system for usages such as irrigation.
The amount of water available can affect the taste and quality of the milk and meat produced by livestock. Dry growing seasons can also mean low quality and quantity yields for grains like barley and wheat needed for feed.
The price increases when there is not availability of those different grains
and other product that we use.
The cost of feed has risen by up to 30% in some cases, thanks to droughts and events like the war in Ukraine. But the work of water conservation is not just for farmers.
I think even from the general public standpoint, we all have to look at trying to conserve water or reuse water.
Jose Arete, CBC News, Lethbridge.
She is on the front lines of trying to bring change to policing in this country. RCMP Corporal Rebecca Monroe hails from the Lytton First Nation. Radio Canada's Alex Lamick met Monroe as she told him about her motivations and ambitions for joining the RCMP.
When it comes to her identity, Rebecca Monroe says being an Indigenous person always comes first. She is originally from the Lytton First Nation and has been with the BC RCMP Indigenous Policing Services for 12 years.
As an Indigenous woman in the RCMP, I do carry a heavy responsibility because I am a minority in a variety of ways. I joined the RCMP to work in Indigenous communities, so having that reason why really helps me fulfill my commitment to ensuring that Indigenous communities are kept safe.
The overrepresentation of Indigenous people in Canada's justice system is one of the reasons that pushed Monroe into policing.
Part of my motivation to join the RCMP was to help my people and my community, my Inlakupma community. I come from Indian residential school survivors. So my grandparents, my parents went to residential school in Lytton at the St. George's Indian Residential School. And I saw the hurt and the trauma and saw how they were, have been treated in various parts of the justice system.
The First Nations and Inuit policing program was created in 1991. It is managed by Public Safety Canada and funded by federal, provincial and territorial government. Its goal, among other things, is to provide culturally responsive policing in First Nations and Inuit communities. Monroe says the RCMP needs more Indigenous officers.
I have spent my entire career recruiting and looking for those members. Officially now, I am an Indigenous recruiter, so that is my substantive role. My everyday motivation is just looking at our communities and looking at the young people and thinking about the difference I'm making to help change that relationship that the police have been viewed in the past.
Despite these goals, Indigenous policing programs are still not considered essential services. Alex Lamick, CBC News, Surrey.
For more on recruiting more Indigenous people into policing, we're now joined by Dean Gladue, Region 3 Director with Métis Nation BC. He's also the Associate Minister of Justice, and he served as a Mountie for 26 years before retiring in 2015. Dean, you've said you never perhaps fully understood the full impact of racism until you joined the RCMP. What do you mean by that?
Well, in 1989, when I joined the RCMP, first of all, I was put into an all-native troop, as we called it at the time, right across from Canada. And just the way we were treated at depot, There's a lot of stories to be told there. And then from there, coming onto the field and experiencing firsthand, because of my race and who I was, and seeing it within my own workforce, I never really understood it until then, and the impact it had on just us in general, historically in Canada as well.
And in that 26 years that you spent serving the country and whatever various communities you served, how did your experience at Depot and beyond influence how you served?
Well, first of all, I'll say Depot was a great experience for me in a sense of the training and the challenge it does have. But, you know, you peel back the onion and you realize that, you know, there is that innuendo that was happening, you know, as a Native troop and as a Native person that, you know, especially when you go into a dominant Native community where crime rate was high, and then you would hear stories from in the inside, you know, why, you know, an example was, Dean, why don't you control your people? Would be one, which I remember hearing distinctly from a staff sergeant, which to me is just an appalling comment.
Yeah. And you also spent some time as a recruiter for the RCMP. What was that experience like?
Well, the big thing was seeing the plus and why being a police officer. And I've always said, if we as Indigenous people want to make change in this country with policing or whatever it is, education, we need to also go on the inside. And then the inside means that we need individuals to get out there, train, to be good officers, work with the community, because I've always said, you know, police are the community, but the community are the police. So it works hand in hand. Mm-hmm. And it's vital that we always will require police, no matter what culture, where we come from. And that's what I really got out of recruiting, was encouraging Indigenous peoples to get involved, to be a part of change. And I will say this, the RCMP has come a long way since 1989 when I joined, in regards to trying to recruit Indigenous people, but also be more inclusive. And that's a plus that I see that is happening within offices across Canada.
How hopeful are you that the RCMP can change as much as it needs to in order to increase recruitment and attract more Indigenous people to the force?
Well, I'm hopeful. You know, first of all, you need leaders like myself. You know, as a Métis Nation leader and working with Indigenous peoples throughout Canada, it's people like myself who experienced the organization and really emphasize the plus to it. You know, one thing, it's a great career. It really is. When you look at the value and the looked after, as well as after the RCMP, as I retired after 26 years, how it looks after me and my, you know, it's got a great pension program as well. And having said that, it's learning to be a servant and working with people. And I think it is a good time for Indigenous people to come into the RCMP and really be open-minded in how they can make change, and also look up to people like myself as elders or seniors, and you know, as a senior police officer, and look for direction.
Retired RCMP Officer Dean Gladue, thank you for speaking with us and sharing your experience.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate your time. And like I said, I just want to finally say this, that the RCMP are a great organization, and like any others, they've got their flaws, but you know, as a people, we can make this country a better place to live.
A rising death toll in Gaza amid a desperate need for supplies. After the break, more on the aid groups raising the alarm over trapped civilians.
Government says society has changed dramatically since 1957. That's when British Columbia's adoption legislation was last revised. So today, the government introduced sweeping changes to the Adoption Act, including widening the definition of who can adopt a child.
Currently, only single people or legally married couples can apply to adopt. Under the new legislation, applications will also be accepted jointly from any two adults, regardless of their marital status or gender.
This lawyer, who deals with gay and lesbian issues, says the old legislation was unfair.
That excluded families who had two lesbian co-moms or two gay co-dads. And this will enable those families to be regularized under the law.
BC's Provincial Reform Party says although it supports allowing common-law couples to adopt, gay couples are unacceptable.
Because I think that children are raised much better, they're whole outlook on life will be different if they're raised in a traditional family.
There are many other changes in this proposed legislation. For example, it will be easier for adult adoptees and their birth parents to get information about each other. As well, adoptions of children from abroad and private adoptions will now be more tightly controlled. In BC, private adoptions are unregulated. A lot of people are waiting to see exactly how the government plans to implement these changes to the Adoption Act. There are currently 1,400 families waiting for adoptions through the provincial government, and no one is sure how many have applied to private agencies. Ian Hannamansing, CBC News, Vancouver.
Aid groups are raising the alarm over civilians trapped in Gaza. They say several trucks expected to cross into the besieged Palestinian territory tomorrow are nowhere near enough. All this comes as worries of an imminent ground war by Israel continue to grow. Margaret Evans has more from Jerusalem.
In Israel, preparations for an anticipated ground invasion of Gaza well underway. Reservists from across the country and around the world refreshing their training, some 360,000 in all. Their cars clogging roads outside reserve bases right across the country. Israeli-Canadian Noy Leib, living in New York, booked a flight as soon as he heard about the Hamas attacks.
The most emotional plane ride I've been at in my life, and it's just, you're preparing yourself for war.
Trained as a machine gun operator, he believes Israel has no choice.
Having those videos of that torture being sent to those families, and it's worse than ISIS. So my personal opinion is that we have to attack, we have to be strong.
When the ground war will come is anybody's guess. Israel's defense minister has told reservists to use the time to prepare. Thanks, guys. We count on you. Good luck, he's saying. And anyone who now sees Gaza from a distance will see it from the inside. I promise you. In Gaza, on the inside, Israel's air war is now in its 13th day. And those who fled the bombs in the north are finding them in the south, too. Another airstrike in Han Yunis today. Parents struggling to protect their families.
Hello.
Hi, Muhammad. It's Margaret.
Oh, hi, Margaret. Hi.
Muhammad Abu Sada is a political science professor from Gaza City, now living in cramped quarters with 60 other people.
It's very crowded with little water. That's the most pressing issue for all of us here in Khan.
That and trying to calm his daughter's fears.
She has been screaming, she has been crying for most of the time because of the sound of the bombing, because of knowing about the death of one of her classmates.
He says Western governments have given Israel the green light to wreak the carnage it has on a long, narrow strip of land with nowhere to run.
What you hear from the U.S. and Western government is that Israel has the right to defend itself, which is fine with me. No one can debate the issue of government or sovereign state to defend themselves, but not to go after children, not to go after civilians, and not to go after hospitals. That's what I'm talking about.
The promise, negotiated by the U.S. President Joe Biden, of just 20 humanitarian aid trucks to be allowed into Gaza remains unfulfilled, now expected tomorrow. Aid agencies say that is a drop in an ocean of need. Margaret Evans, CBC News, Jerusalem.
To Israel's northern border now, where tensions have been rising with Lebanon. Since the attacks by Hamas on October 7th, Hezbollah and Israeli troops have been exchanging fire more often. As Chris Brown reports, this is where an escalation in the conflict could happen.
On Israel's northern border, there's already a shooting war with Hezbollah in Lebanon, but it's intermittent and low intensity. Should the war against Hamas escalate, this could be the flashpoint. Our crew has come to the fruit farm of Nadav and Adam Ishak, where the border with Lebanon is under 2 kilometers away.
Everything to the right of that wall, that's Lebanon.
Yes. They told us Hezbollah fires artillery in this direction daily. And in the village right next door, this strike hit today, says Israel's military. This was their response. We feel like they're testing us because they see civilians and they shoot a missile, he said. While both Hamas and Hezbollah are backed by Iran, Hezbollah is far more powerful. Its leadership boasts of having more than 100,000 fighters and long-range missiles powerful enough to destroy high-rises in Israeli cities. The possibility of opening new fronts against the Zionist regime is inevitable, said Iran's foreign minister in an ominous warning. Here on the border, the fear is that Hezbollah has already laid the groundwork for an attack by digging tunnels under the Israeli defenses. Several were found near here a few years ago. It's terrifying when you realize the ability that they have to come in here.
It's eerily quiet here. This is one of 28 communities along the border with Lebanon that Israel's military has ordered evacuated, but not everyone can leave.
The brothers say they have to stay because someone needs to run the farm. Their families have moved to a university dorm an hour south. Idan, Nadav's wife, says she hears his anxiety when they talk on the phone.
I think that it's the first time in my life that I heard from him that he's afraid also.
Although it's safer here for their children, she says she's conflicted about leaving.
If everyone from the border would go to the center of Israel, what would happen in the borders? So the center would be the border.
The family keeps a reminder of the last time Hezbollah and Israel fought in 2006. Katyusha. Part of a rocket that destroyed buildings on their farm, and they hope this is the only missile they'll ever see. Chris Brown, CBC News, near the Israel-Lebanon border.
Fall is prime mushroom foraging season. After the break, we're going to hear from a BC expert about the mushroom named after him. Stick around.
You've seen this before, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and here it is here, Section 33, the notwithstanding clause. Parliament or the legislature of a province may expressly declare in an act of Parliament or of the legislature, as the case may be, that the act or a provision thereof shall operate notwithstanding a provision included in Section 2 or Section 7(2)15 of this charter. Clear as mud, right? Let me translate. Basically, what this section says is if a provincial government wants to, it can override other sections of the Charter, the ones that deal with legal rights, equality rights, and fundamental freedoms. And if a government invokes the clause while bringing down legislation that might violate those rights and freedoms, the legislation can't be challenged in court. there's the big deal. When it was designed, legal experts envisioned the clause only being used in the most extraordinary of circumstances. Think of it as like a break glass in case of emergency clause. But in recent years, it's been used a lot.
And we used the notwithstanding clause to ensure that happened.
For example, Ontario used it to try and end a strike. Quebec used it to prevent court challenges of a ban on public sector workers wearing religious symbols. And remember, 20 years ago, Alberta Premier Ralph Klein used it in an attempt to prevent same-sex marriage. Now, whether those constitute emergencies, so the clause is kind of complicated, and the reasons for invoking it can be too.
Hey, I'm Johanna Wagstaff.
And hi there, I'm Rohit Joseph.
And we're asking for 10 minutes of your day to go through the 10 things that the UN recommends we can all do when it comes to climate change.
Please don't leave.
No.
And also, the things aren't new.
We are just wired to not do them.
We promise you to help you figure out your brains, and you and your people can make better choices to combat climate change.
10 Minutes to Save the Planet is available now on CBC Listen and everywhere you get your podcasts.
Across Canada, it is getting harder and harder to find truly dark places for sky-gazing within city limits. And some experts say the loss of real night impacts our moods, our culture, even our art. Dennis Coveton speaks to experts who say the absence is really affecting our lives.
Edmonton is full of light, polluted with it, in fact. Buildings, cars, street lamps, they all radiate it. But for millennia, humans navigated, told time, and created stories and philosophies by starlight. So what happens to us when the stars are no longer visible? To find out, we came here to speak to a man who's built a career out of studying the sky.
We're basically standing right now at the center of the Ziedler Dome, our planetarium at the TELUS World of Science Edmonton, where we can recreate the nighttime sky and show its many wonders. Well, light pollution is any light that basically spills out amongst anything, whether it be you sitting in your house at home with your light on your living room on, that's light pollution as it encroaches out into the natural environment, outdoors and things like that. Edmonton is a major urban population here with a lot of light pollution. When we compare it to other major cities, it's fairly bad.
We know light pollution has negative effects on both animals and humans. It confuses nocturnal animals and messes with our circadian rhythms. But some experts say it's affecting us in other ways too. Noctalgia, or sky grief, describes the feeling of loss one may experience when they can no longer see a dark night sky. The researchers who invented the term say it represents not just the loss of environment, but also the loss of traditions, heritage, and storytelling connected to the star-dotted sky.
I really feel the loss. I remember being on my grandparents' farm and going outside to use the outhouse in the night, and the darkness with no moon was thick. I felt like I was actually kind of swimming through it.
Jarek is concerned about what effect that loss of darkness will have on our culture.
I think it diminishes the visceral effect in all areas of arts and culture that touches the human spirit.
You're losing something. You're losing, again, the ability to look up and appreciate the night sky. The city will always have this sort of glow surrounding it. And it's only when you take maybe a 30-minute drive out of the city that you can kind of leave that glow of the city behind you, this dome of light.
Dennis Cofton, CBC News, Edmonton.
If you like fungi, this Sunday, Van Dusen Botanical Gardens will be bursting with mushrooms for the Vancouver Mycological Society's 42nd annual mushroom show. Paul Kruger is a founding member of the mushroom group. He spoke to Michelle Elliott on BC Today earlier today.
There is a mushroom in Haida-Gwaii that I misidentified many, many times as a European species, and called Cortinarius lemonius as a European, and then they named it after me, Cortinarius krugeri, because I misidentified it more than anybody else.
Okay, and so what did you learn about it then?
Oh, it's quite fascinating. It appears to be almost exclusively confined to Haida-Gwaii so far.
Wow.
And it's now going to be on the BC and Canadian species at risk list of orange ranked species of concern.
Mushrooms are cool, Darius Madavi, and the right ones, delicious.
Yes, I agree. I'm going to resist the urge to make a fungi joke.
Instead, you're not. Go ahead.
No, I want to do it. But instead, I have a fun fact that Mel in the control room just told me, which is fantastic. Did you know that oyster mushrooms are carnivorous? They secrete a chemical that causes worms called nematodes to be attracted to them and come over, and then it digests them and eats them, which is so cool. Mushrooms are the best.
Fun fact.
All
right.
There. Okay.
There
you did it.
Right.
You did
it's
it.
Sitting right there, man.
I'm moving on, Dan. Okay. Let's talk about the drought. We've seen some improvement once again, especially in the south, really only in the south. The coast, as you might expect, all the rain did help the drought situation quite a bit. Even in the interior, we didn't see as many showers, but we did see some breakthrough. But I think the large driver here is that temperatures have come down a lot from the summer, which means relative humidity has come up. The drought situation is improving really throughout the south. But in the north, we do still have quite a bad drought situation. Maybe we'll see some more showers next week. That'll change that. But it is too early to say. And right now, things are looking quite dry for the near future for the north as well. So keep a lookout for that. In terms of the atmospheric river, still streaming into the province as of yesterday. But now it has moved further south and it is out of our area of concern. It's going to continue receding back, and that's pretty much the end of our long band of moisture that's been moving in, which means a couple of drier days ahead over the last 24 hours. Still seeing quite a bit of that moisture streaming in through the province, but if we zoom into the south coast, you'll see here pretty much drying up. Some of these are probably artifacts. So we are still seeing some scattered showers across the south coast, but some of these are probably radar artifacts that we're looking at here. So really drying up now, and as we look into the next little while, it looks like we've got not really much rain to speak of. Most of it is cleared up. We still got some cloud happening over the next few days. We're looking fairly cloudy until probably Sunday. Some models have lots of cloud, some have very little. It looks like we should have at least some sunny breaks by then as that cloud starts to move further south, and then we get a ridge of high pressure setting up that should mean some clearer skies pretty much across the south. But for tomorrow, still plenty of cloud, a little bit of showers potentially still breaking through, but that's really the end of it. And then here in Vancouver, we've got a few cloudy days, and then we see that break in sun. So not too bad. At least the rain's gone.
Not at all. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, Dan.
An historic church up for sale. And a surprising way to breathe new life into an old building. That's next.
You've seen this before. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and here it is here, Section 33, the notwithstanding clause. Parliament or the legislature of a province may expressly declare in an act of Parliament or of the legislature, as the case may be, that the act or a provision thereof shall operate notwithstanding a provision included in Section 2 or Section 7, 215 of this charter. Clear as mud, right? Let me translate. Basically, what this section says is if a provincial government wants to, it can override other sections of the Charter, the ones that deal with legal rights, equality rights, and fundamental freedoms. And if a government invokes the clause while bringing down legislation that might violate those rights and freedoms, the legislation can't be challenged in court. There's the big deal. When it was designed, legal experts envisioned the clause only being used in the most extraordinary of circumstances. Think of it as like a break glass in case of emergency clause. But in recent years, it's been used a lot.
And we use the notwithstanding clause to ensure that happened.
For example, Ontario used it to try and end a strike. Quebec used it to prevent court challenges of a ban on public sector workers wearing religious symbols. And remember, 20 years ago, Alberta Premier Ralph Klein used it in an attempt to prevent same-sex marriage. Now, whether those constitute emergencies, so the clause is kind of complicated, and the reasons for invoking it can be too.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
Celebrate the achievement and resilience of women in the workforce with CBC's Michelle Elliott on November 21st at the annual Dress for Success Luncheon. Get tickets and learn more at successluncheon.ca. And stay on top of what's happening where you live with our weekly newsletter. Subscribe today for special programming series, events, and contests at cbc.ca/Vancouver Inbox.
An old rundown church in Quebec is getting a new lease on life. The space will grow fresh vegetables and then store them. As Emily Warren reports, the project is trying to help fight food insecurity.
The church that you see behind me is almost 100 years old. It was built in 1931, and it's about to be completely changed inside.
Half of the church will be turned into a cold room, the other half into a packaging room.
We will also have a greenhouse, one interior greenhouse that will be, as you see behind me, that will be the heart of the church. That's for the interior greenhouse. And outside, we will have the exterior greenhouse.
The idea was the brainchild of Jean Champagne. He says he got the idea during a family dinner early in the pandemic. He was talking about the rising cost of food with his daughter.
She told us, if you want to help people, the best thing to do is to have fresh vegetable for the poor people.
So he launched Cultiver pour Partager. The nonprofit grows food and collects vegetables that would otherwise go to waste, donating its harvest to the local food bank, Moisson Beauce. It was when the group started looking for a place to store its produce that Champagne learned the church in Saint-Alfred was up for sale. It needs some repairs. The first step is to reinforce the floor so it can sustain the weight of a forklift.
Fait qu'ici, on a vraiment une partie des récoltes de Cultiver pour Partager.
Champagne's daughter Marie is the general manager of Moisson Beauce. The food bank will rent the cold room, allowing it to double its storage capacity and distribute fresh produce year-round.
On a tellement une forte augmentation de la demande que ce qui rentre sort très, très, très rapidement.
Cultiver pour Partager acquired the church for a symbolic amount of $1. The church says it wanted to sell it to a group that reflects its values.
Même si ça ne rapportait pas au niveau monétaire à l'Église, on a choisi de le laisser aller pour la communauté.
Renovations will start next month. Champagne says the goal is to be ready for the next harvest. Emily Warren, CBC News, Saint-Alfred.
This next story comes ahead of the spookiest time of year. A New England man has made it his mission to memorialize once booming businesses that are bust.
I thought it was a creative way to remember these stores that we grew up with and places we grew up with.
His motto, gone but not forgotten. He pays Halloween-inspired homage by creating tombstone memorials to much-loved businesses that have gone belly up, including Sears, Radio Shack, and Blockbuster Video. The cemetery has become a big hit over the 3 years since he started the project. Rest in peace, VHS. Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem, our free app, as well as on YouTube and our website, cbc.ca/BC. Janella Hamilton will have your next local news at 11 o'clock, right after the National. Good night.